Hi guys, this is Ariel, the artist behind Stray Aria character art. Today I am working on a furry convention badge style piece of my character, Ryley. This is done in Chameleon Markers and in Prismacolor watercolor pencils and done on mixed media paper. I really like how this turned out. It was awesome. There was a couple moments when I was working on it that I was like, ugh, what am I doing? But she turned out awesome, and next time I think I may try doing it on my Bristol marker paper just because this is starting to curl a little bit, which may fix it whenever I laminate it. But I think the marker paper is just a hair thicker, so it might actually turn out better. Thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoy this. It has voiceover on it, and I hope to see you at the end of the video. Thanks. So here I'm drawing on my Artograph Light Pad. It's the 9x12 size. I'm doing this on my Canson multimedia paper, as I said before. I'm using a combination of Micron and Streadtler, probably saying that wrong, lining pens. I tend to go through and do the smallest and thinnest lines first. This way I can go back in and add line weight later. Going in and doing the hair now. Little section of the hair anyways. My goal with this is just to get the basic shapes down, and then whenever I come back in later with heavier pens, then I'll start to add dimension to the drawing. Okay, so I have a really bad habit of drawing on a small sketchbook. So here I'm lining the rest of the body. I had to go in and sketch it on my final paper since I didn't do the original sketch on a large enough sheet of paper to do the whole body. I really don't like that I have a tendency to do this because it doesn't give me the chance to work out anatomy and posing, because, you know, erasing is very bad for the paper. So I tend to have to go with my first instinct instead of working out the shape. Next time I'm going to try to remember to do it on my larger sketchbook paper. Now I'm going in and adding a heavier line to the outside of the character. If I was drawing a background, the line work would be based on the light source, so it would be lighter weight lines closer to the light source and heavier weight lines away from the light source. With this convention style badge that I'm doing, I'm simply adding line weight to bring various portions of her anatomy forward in space, and also define her further. So once I go in with my color, those lines will start to disappear a little bit. So the heavier the line, the more likely it is to stick around through the coloring stage. Now I'm starting to use the pens to bring certain sections of her anatomy forward in space, such as her head is further forward than the rest of her neck. Her hair sits on top of her head. The horn sits out in front of the hair. Her muzzle sits out further from the rest of her face. And the same with that section of her tail. Going in and adding in the eyelashes again. Now I'm coming in with a thinner pen to add detail work. This way I can give some definition to her hair. I can add in some texture for the fur. This also gives me important information in the coloring stage to know what shapes I'm creating. I'm going in and adding final details to the eyes here. continuing to add in more fur texture. This is an important step because I feel it adds more life to the character. Like if I was going to leave this as just line work, I need to make sure that the line work has weight and has character, just so that way it's a finished piece. Just going in with the thin liner wouldn't leave me with such a nice character. Alright, now I'm going in and starting to color. I like to use my watercolor pencils. And here I have actually laid down a layer of watercolor pencil and have gone in with my WaterBrush by Pentel, which it's a water brush that has a chamber that holds water, and you can control the flow of the water, which is really nice to make sure that I don't oversaturate my paper, and allows me to blur out just enough of the lines. Now I'm going in and adding in shadows and adding in a little bit of fur texture with my Prismacolor watercolor pencils. I like to do this as opposed to using wax-based colored pencils because I feel that it allows the final piece to have much smoother transitions between color and allows me to get sharper details in the final piece. Blending all that detail out again with the water brush. You can see it shaking around in the chamber there. Continuing to blur out detail. It's also nice because I'm not adding, when we get to the marker stage, I won't be adding marker directly to white paper, which will make it darker and less saturated in areas. The other nice thing about the watercolor pencils is they don't break quite as much as the Prismacolor wax-based pencils, which I find really obnoxious. Just going in and adding the last level of value there. This area is the lightest section on her, so I was trying to keep it as light as possible. Back in and doing the hair now. I'm actually doing her horns now. And her toenails, which are off the screen. Good going, me. Now I'm doing her hair. Again, I also like doing this stage because then when I get to the marker stage, I've already got an idea of what the shapes that I'm creating will be. Because unlike acrylics, you can't just paint over things. Color down for her eyes. A little bit of color down for her jewelry. Alright, and now we're starting with the markers. I like to use the Chameleon Markers. The reason I really like these markers is because they have a mixing chamber. And in that mixing chamber you have straight medium, which in this case is alcohol. That mixing chamber then can be stuck onto the tip of your pen, and that pen then in the pen tip the medium and the pigment will get diluted. This means that you can create many different shades of the same color without having to have multiple different pens. This is nice because then that means you have to buy less colors, which is less expensive. But the one problem is the amount of time you have between the, almost pure medium and fully saturated pigment is a little hard to guess. It takes a little bit of practice and effort to try to figure out how long you have between things. That's why I like to work in small sections as opposed to working in big sections, because this way I can control how quickly I'm moving between shades. Because I can always go back over an area later if it's moving too slowly or if it moved too quickly. And usually when I'm using these markers, I like to lay down the darkest shade or the fully saturated pigment first in the areas that are going to have the most shadows, and then go back in and use the mixing chamber to create the lighter shades. This way, I can control where my details are going and where my shadows are going to be. Just in case, it doesn't quite move as smoothly as I was expecting it to. And that was me waiting for it to mix again. That's the other thing, it takes time. It takes about 30 seconds for it to be fully ready to go, to get fully clear medium in there. It's a bit slower than using Copics. I'm going back in with a less saturated blue. This way I'm bringing down the saturation level so it's a bit more, tiny bit more realistic. She's not meant to be a grayish blue. She's meant to be blue. So but I don't want it to be, blinding to look at, so. Going back in and adding more detail into my darks here. Adding some fur texture. And if you can see it or not, but I'm holding that mixing chamber again. These pens are meant to be stored horizontally because of that mixing chamber. Actually, I think all alcohol-based markers are supposed to be stored horizontally, so that way you can use both tips. Going in and adding those darkest values first, so that way they're locked in. See, I'm adding lines to emulate fur texture there. Alright, and now going in and adding the values into the cheek. And the nice thing about it is, if I was using my Copic pens for this, it would require multiple different pens to do the same type of work. I used, I think, 6 blues on this. To get all these different shades of my Copic markers, I would have had to use probably close to 20. Because I could control the value with one pen. back in and doing it in the rest of the body. You can see me here strategically choosing where to use my marker based on the value that the ink currently has. Going back in and deepening those values. Because again, the color was just a little bit too saturated for my liking, so I went back in with one of my less saturated pens to tone down the color some. Continuing to work to lay down color. I also find that with the Chameleon markers, they do tend to blend with themselves pretty easily, is what I found. So even after your ink is completely dried, it's easy to come back in and blend things out a little bit. Now, I like to work from my darkest values to my lightest values, but everyone has their own way of doing things. Now, if I had a character that had smoother transitions between the different markings and things like that, then I might work a different way. But this is how I work. Everyone can work their own way. Darkening up the tail now. Adding in some more details there. And see, I pulled out my Copic markers because I wanted to get some different values in there. So I have more Copic markers than I have Chameleon markers. I have a 72-piece set that I got when I was working at a little art store here locally. I've had them for several years. I don't use them enough. Cleaning up my workstation a little bit. I don't tend to put things up until I'm completely done with a project, which is something I should probably change. As you can see the pile of pencil shavings to the side there. Yeah, so the value that I wanted for the lightest section of her fur, I didn't think that I had a Chameleon marker that would work, so I'm coming in here with my Copics, which I have lighter shades of, and adding in the darkest values right now on her lightest section of fur. You can see I pulled a different pen now, though, to do in the lighter values. And I'll pull out my Chameleon marker again to desaturate the color a little bit. Now I'm working on her hair. Again, adding in the darkest values first. There I was using the mixing chamber, so I'm starting working in small sections. See here, my pen was pretty dark, so I just went ahead and did areas that were darker. See how quickly I was able to get some highlights and darks in there with that. Going in and doing her toes and her horns, her tail spike. Sorry about that. Continuing to add deeper values. I had lost some of the richness of her darkest markings, so right now I'm going back in and darkening it up a little bit. But until you have all your color down, you don't know if that's not dark enough, so. The difficult thing would have been if it was too dark. Because then I'd have to darken everything else up in relation to it, since I can't take up color with markers. And I'm coming back in with my watercolor pencils to add in some details and add in some texture. Also is allowing me to darken up my values even further and in a more controlled fashion, because the tip of my watercolor pencil can get smaller than the tip of my markers. Coming in with my different values to add some more definition. I'm really liking how the tail is turning out. I tend to struggle a little bit sometimes with getting large tufts of hair like that to turn out looking nice, so I'm glad that it turned out pretty good this time. I'm just going back in and blending out some of the harsher lines with my water brush there. And again, adding more texture and darkening my values. Alright, and now I'm coming in with my white gel pen and adding in some highlights, adding in some whiskers, continuing to create some more fur texture. This is again because I can't add white marker or white pencil on top of the marker because it's just going to disappear and most likely just blend things. You can see there that I was lining the edge of her shapes. This is to help, again, bring shapes forward in space because you start to lose some of your marker lines after this many layers of color have been laid down. Do it on her tail now. And this is when I really started to see the piece come together. Up until this point, I was a little bit concerned about how it was turning out. And when I started adding in these white lines, it really helped to finish out the piece some. I'm darkening up some of my lines that needed to be a hair darker. And lastly, what I do is I go in with my white gouache and take away any of the times that I went outside the lines with the marker. I think right now I was trying to add a little bit of water to that because it was a little too thick. And gouache is nice because it's opaque, so it will cover up the marker as opposed to just straight watercolor. You'd still see the color through it. Alright, and that's all, guys. Thank you so much for watching. You can find the full high-quality piece on my FA. The link is in the description, along with links to all the products that I used today. Thank you. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week with my next project.